Hi, everyone. Welcome back to part two. Sorry about that intermission. But this talk is lightning security across components. And for those of you that are just joining us, we wanted to apologize yesterday for the scheduling mishap. This talk was scheduled twice, and there was some scheduling issues. So personally apologize for that. So let's get into it. So I'm Nishal Shah. I was one of the previous presenters on the last presentation, so hopefully you remember me. And this is my coworker.
I'm Ryan Flood. You've probably seen me before with lightning talks for years and years, and I'm actually supporting Adidas today, unlike our last presenter who was rocking Nike. Clearly not a Commerce Cloud customer, but we're working on it.
Slowly. All right, so we're both on the product security team. So just what we do is we do the security review process on the App Exchange. We also open source some security tools, and we work with our internal engineering teams to make sure we're building the most secure products that we can. Forward-looking statement. So make sure you make any purchasing decisions based on the product we have out today. And today's agenda, we did a brief intro to Lightning in the previous one. We'll just quickly go through that and go over the highlights. It won't be as extensive as before, but for those of you new joining us, you won't be left out. We'll go into more specific security considerations that we hinted at in the previous talk, locker service and content security policy, and how that plays into your Oregon components. And then there's a lot of people that say locker service doesn't allow us to do something, and we're going to talk about the solution using component communication. And then we go into an interesting third potential attack vector that we've lately, just very recently, are seeing on the app, on the security review process, and we just wanted to bring it into the light and make sure this, you guys are aware that how to fix these sort of attacks. And then we'll have some Q&A, and then we'll also be at the security booth until 2, so you can also visit us then if you have maybe more one-on-one questions. So Ryan.
Yeah, thanks, Nishal. So you probably saw this slide in our last talk. Other way. But I'm going to give it to you again for those of you who are just joining us. Lightning is awesome. Lightning's amazing. There's a little bit of confusion about what lightning means. And when we're talking about lightning, there's 4 different things we can refer to. We have our lightning components framework. This is the tools you use to develop. It's your components, your code that we're actually writing and using to make custom awesome applications. The lightning experience is the end user facing part of lightning. It is this big, beautiful UI right here. You cannot see my laser pointer, sadly. But there was a laser pointer up there. And it's the good UI that you all know and love and makes you 40% more productive. We have our visual building tools. These tools are things like the Lightning App Builder, the Community Builder, where you take components, build apps out of them, and create awesome experiences for your users with clicks instead of code. And lastly, we have our Lightning Design System. This is an open source collection of HTML templates and CSS elements for you to create programs not necessarily on the Salesforce platform that meet our styling in. Like Nishal said, what is a component? We've circled them all or boxed them all in red. The important takeaways here are components can have the same data. And the example of here, we have United Oil and our United Oil installations versus the plant security. They're mostly the same. It just shows the name, a date, some amount. Components can have different subcomponents. So if we take a look at our assistant up there, we see, while it's kind of the same, we have different actions we can take off components. And one thing we did not show on this slide is components are rearrangeable. If we want, we can move the assistant over to the left, get rid of this performance graph entirely, take these recent records, make that the most important thing for our users, depending on our use case. That involves a lot. Nishal, do you want to tell us a little bit about what security considerations we bake into this?
Right. Thanks, Ryan. So we'll get on to it. This is just the slide Ryan presented, but now we're going to talk about it in a security context. So what is important to remember is that these components all share the same DOM. These components can be placed anywhere on the page. And like Ryan said, components can be removed entirely. So you don't have actually too much control where the component is placed on a page as a developer. You can't make assumptions on what component is next to me because that may not be actually what the page is displaying. And so with that, there are some security assumptions that are broken compared to other JavaScript frameworks. So we'll get into that and how different, especially in this talk, how components can influence other components in a secure manner and what sort of issues you can run into with that. So these are the 3 themes I talked about previously, and I just want to reiterate here. So we saw that the user being an attacker, right? A developer should always assume that the attacker is a potential user of my component, of my app. And you should assume that any user input is malicious, right? With that being said, sometimes developers get a little confused, so we wanted to bring it out, highlight it even further. And the client being an attacker, right? It's any data that gets sent over a wire. So if you have an Apex controller on the server side, it takes in some values, some parameters, and that you can execute on, right? And that comes from the Lightning framework that the component sends off. That data shouldn't be trusted because that is coming from the client side, and ultimately the attacker can control this. So you should always assume when you're doing server side that whatever the client is sending you, you need to validate first. So this talk, we're going to mainly talk about this interesting paradigm, the other component being an attacker. Like I said, components can be placed with other components. You could have a managed package that you downloaded from the App Exchange, and you could have your own internal Salesforce developers writing components, and those 2 components can live on the same page. And so you have various authors of different components. They can be placed anywhere on the page. So there's some interesting considerations, and we'll be focusing on this 3rd theme in this talk. So Ryan's going to talk about some locker service. You may have heard about it, and I don't want to take his thunder away, so I'll let Ryan take over.
Thanks. So locker service. It is basically keeping your component in those red boxes we talked about earlier. A lot of people have been hearing about locker service. People have been scared of it for a few releases. Well, locker service is here. It's wonderful. It's on by default for everyone. You can't turn it off. This is amazing. This is a huge security win for all of us. But what does it mean when you're actually working and building Lightning components? Well, you don't have access to the real DOM. You have access to your component's sandbox, and that's really about it. So instead of your window element, you get a secure window that we've provided. Same with document, same with element, same with a bunch of other browser APIs. You don't have access to the real browser client as much. And when you're using these secure windows, when you're using the secure element, you can't reach out of your component and mess with Salesforce code. Similarly, if my component is living next to Nishal's component on this homepage, Nishal's component, when it's trying to grab all of the inputs, won't accidentally grab mine and autofill it for me when it's his code and in a different namespace. An easy way to make sure you're Locker compliant, switch your code to API v40 or above, run it again, make sure it works, because this is how we know that the code is running in a secure manner. But Locker service isn't just sandboxing. Locker service also protects you. It provides lines of defense against cross-site scripting. We have automatic attribute escaping in most contexts. So if it's just a naked merge tag directly in between HTML elements, you're good. If you're in attributes, you're good for most attributes, with the exception of some dangerous ones like href or iframe source. When we roll out CSP is an optional critical update now, but when we roll out CSP, if there does happen to be an XSS by something we missed or something you missed, the browser will protect you against the exploitation of that with unsafe inline and dropping eval. Lastly, JavaScript strict mode is enabled with Locker, making sure that we write clear, understandable JavaScript apps by using a limited but well-defined subset of JavaScript. One note, actually, and I know this has been a big issue for some of our partners, is JavaScript strict mode will break certain third-party libraries. Maybe your old version of jQuery was not written to be compatible with JavaScript strict mode, or your special widget to integrate with your custom map solution isn't written in JavaScript strict mode. I understand that. That's difficult. We have a whitelist on our documentation of libraries we know that are big, common libraries pinned to the version numbers that work in Locker. I would recommend that you look at that if you want some of that functionality. But Nishal, I understand we have a demo.
Yeah, so just wanted to show Basically, we talked about this API v40 and upgrading components from previous API versions to this new API version. So like, what does that actually look like? And just wanted to demonstrate that. So here, we have, so basically what I'm going to show in this demo is we're going to have a managed package, and we're going to have an unmanaged package. The unmanaged package written in the C namespace, so my own org's namespace, and the managed package running in the df17s security namespace. And what we're going to show is that the managed package is going to try to reach, the managed component is going to try to reach into the unmanaged component and actually manipulate the DOM. And we're going to show that now. So we have this application. The application is actually running on API v40. So that's interesting. Oh, is it started? Did it play? No. So, right, so this is all the code. Simple. We're running on API v40 just to prove it to you. And then I just made a note of it. And then if we go into the actual unmanaged component, this is running on API v41, so even newer. And we just create this list with an ID, and we have this unmanaged component. Oops, okay. So we have this ID here, and if we keep going.
So this is the code for the managed package, right?
Yes, this is the code for the managed package. Whoop, did I skip forward? Sorry. So this is, hold on, this is, okay, sorry. So we're going to back up a little bit, excuse me, and this is going to be the unmanaged package component running on API v41. And then we have a managed component, which is called locker_protection. And we're going to look into what that looks, we're going to look at the code for that. And we can see here that it's running, so API v40, run it. And we can see actually locker service protected us here. And now, if we look at what happens when we do the same thing, but we're going to run, so this is the exact same code, nothing's changed. This is still the unmanaged component running on API v41. And this, we're going to look at the managed package code, which is called locker protection. It's the exact same code. And just to prove it to you, we're going to go into what that looks like. And we can see that this one has a global, it's a global component. Just for the demonstration, it's a managed package, just to make that specify. And in this case, we actually have API v38. So we're a little bit older. And just to prove it to you, and so we have an ID called ID, straightforward. And just to show you some of the JavaScript code, that we're actually, what this is just going to do is just going to create like 1, 2, 3, 4. Nothing, right? It's just counting. So I just want to go slowly here so you understand the code that's going on. So we're just getting an ID, document, get all of ID, and then we're creating an element. So we're just counting again, 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're just going to append that to the DOM. Yep, and that's appending. And now if we go back and we actually look at the application, we can see, and now we hit the count higher button, we're counting 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, yep, application still v40. My own component's running on 41, but the managed component is running on 38, and we hit the count higher button here. We can see that we actually manipulated the DOM. Oops, sorry. We actually manipulated the DOM of another component, right? So the issue here was that locker service wasn't enabled in 38. We switched it to 40, and we saw that it was enabled. So we saw that the DOM was being protected by locker service on when the component was actually on 40. So it's important to note here. We saw what's going on. It's important to note that even though my own component had 40 and my application was 41, the attacker's component was 38. So locker service is actually enabled, is only isolated based on the component that I actually have. So if I am on 38, locker service is enabled for me. I can still access the DOM. even though maybe Ryan's component is on 40. So you have to make sure that all of your components are running on 40 to get a full protection from locker service. It's not just about my components running 40. So.
Not only that, on the App Exchange, we do not accept components that are less than API v40. If you are running without locker service, you cannot sell on the App Exchange. Period. End of discussion. But let's take a look at what just happened, right? The old documentation we used to have said only use component.find because that will respect our sandbox. But before locker service, if you use document.getElementById, we run into the issue we just demonstrated. So this is the old documentation. Now we can do this just fine, provided you're on API v40, and we are good to go. We're running a little short on time, so let's kind of try and speed through component communication.
So a lot of the issues with locker service is, hey, I need to manipulate these other components to do something for my business use case. How do I still do that with locker service enabled? It seems like this is a big blocker for me. So there's something in the Aura framework called component communication, and what it actually is Aura events. And it's a pub submodel, publisher subscriber. So basically, you have a listener and you have a publisher for a event. Publisher of the event says, hey, something happened. It's like me shouting into this room, you all hear it, but I'm not telling you what to do with that information. That's the same paradigm going on with component communication. If you stick to the old model where I manipulate the DOM, you really aren't getting a lot of code reusability, right? I'm assuming that this other component is on my same page to be able to manipulate that DOM. But in this case, I don't really care because I publish some sort of event that's happened. What the other components do with it is none of my concern. So this is a really good security win. You get code reusability because now you're not have these dependencies on component A and component B and component C. They're very modularized. And it's scalability because I can publish one event and 1,000 components can react. I don't have to manipulate the DOM for 1,000 components. Those other components will know how to react. So with that, we want to go into the interesting potential security issue that I hinted at before, which is the untrusted global attribute.
Thanks. And this one is really strange, and I'm super excited to get to talk about it to you. So, what's the issue with global attributes? Well, if you remember our big takeaway earlier, other components are attackers. And when we set component access and attribute access to global, we allow other components to embed us and to actually take this data and give it to us. But we also talked in the last talk about dangerous context to put data in. And in this case, we're taking a look at specifically two of those. iframe source. We used to talk about putting JavaScript in here if it's from the user. That's dangerous because it could lead to cross-site scripting. Similarly, if we take this unescaped data from a global attribute, that means another component could include us and embed a malicious page into our application with this iframe. They could, for example, register evilsalesforce.com, put that iframe in, make it look like Salesforce with a login page to attack our users. That's not something we want to do. Similarly, unescaped HTML is an Aura tag that does not do any escaping. It's a dangerous tag. Similarly, we do not want to put unescaped data from another component into that. Any data that comes directly from a global attribute should be considered malicious and should undergo a similar sanitization process as we described in the last talk. Now, what you sanitize and how you sanitize depends on the context. If it's a URL, you have to do it one way. If it's HTML, you have to do it another way. I'd recommend taking a look at our secure coding documentation for how to do that properly. And I believe we have a demo. I think we should skip that since we're just about out of time. Come talk to us later, though, if you want more information on this type of attack. But initially, you want to take us home?
Yep. So the three key takeaways, if you didn't understand anything, you should visit us at the security booth and talk to us. But the three main things for you to take away as developers or admins is try to upgrade all of your components to API v40 and higher. You should also insist on any of your partners that are developing code for you to make sure that they're upgrading all of their components to 40 and higher. So that way, locker service is enabled for all of your components across the board. Second one is you should treat global attributes as malicious, and that goes back to our one of our key themes about the attacker controls global attributes. There's another component that's giving you data, and you're somehow rendering it onto the page. And we have a demo for that. We can show you at the security booth. We ran out of time. And the third one is use Aura events for component communication. This makes developers' lives easier. It makes assessing the security of your components much, much easier. So those are the three big takeaways here for this talk. And if you have further questions, come visit us at the security booth.
Where's that security booth?
It's back right in front of the admin theater, just behind us. So just a few steps away.
Cool, and we have about one more talk that should be going on very soon, getting the most out of security scans. I recommend you take a look at that, to look at our scanners, which actually can detect some of these issues for us. But thank you for bearing with us. I realize it's been a long conference. I realize most of you are tired from all the parties and want to go home, but we appreciate you taking the time to learn about security. If you have any questions, come up to us after the fact. Come see us at the booth. But thank you for an amazing Dreamforce, guys.
Yeah.